Hey folks, I just want to give you a 4-minute warning. We're going to get started in about 4 minutes or so. So you got time to get something to drink, settle in, and we'll get going. All right, I've got 1 o'clock showing on my, well, it's not a watch, on my phone. Are we ready to get going? We've got 2 presentations back to back. One will actually lead into the other somewhat, from what I understand. I think they're really good. Remember, as we're going along, feel free to ask questions when they come to you. You don't necessarily have to wait to the end. Presenter will make sure to tell you if he's going to get to it in a little bit, though. So he might defer. That's okay. However, I want to make sure that you also have the opportunity to discuss these. You have the opportunity to make the comments, to participate fully, and you get the most out of this that we can. After we do these 2 presentations, we'll have public comment, and we'll take care of a little voting business, and then we'll be done. Sound good? Charles is on board, so I'm good. All right. Up next. Ready to go, sir?
While it's loading, good afternoon. My name's James Therrell. I'm the Mission Planning Manager for Environmental Management Operations for SRS. Talk to you about a topic today that I personally enjoy working on. Accelerated basin de-inventory modeling is basically some of the tools we use to ensure seamless integration between SRNS and SRMC. Have a team of folks that work on this somewhat full-time in addition to some other activities. And as you see, as we move through talking about all of the parameters that we look at for modeling between SRNS and SRMC, you'll see it does take a team of dedicated engineers because it is quite complex. So that's what I really want you to get out of this today is a level of complexity that's involved in the modeling, as well as what are some of the tools we use to analyze, and then any questions you may have with regard to how we manage those parameters. Move on. Oh, this is me. All right. So to get a feel for how the parameters that we monitor with regard to the interface between SRMC, take a step back and look at the ABD system. And as y'all are well aware, we've moved to an accelerated basin de-inventory approach. Whereas before we had all of our spent fuel in El Basin being transported to H Canyon by rail car in solid form. And our old process would recover that HEU, convert it to a low enriched form for commercial fuel fabrication. Once we found a more cost-effective and streamlined approach to dispositioning this fuel in El Basin to maximize the throughput and the de-inventory of El Basin, we switched to a much more simple process where we eliminated a lot of the processing steps internal to the canyon, i.e. solvent extraction, taking all of the different liquid waste streams and purifying them. The process got a lot more simple in that now we're just dissolving the fuel and no longer separating the streams. So what we realized, though, once you do that, the process and the coordination between H Canyon and liquid waste is a lot more complicated than the old process. And what I mean by that, the old process with LEU, you had one consistent feed spec. So I want you to think about, as we move through this presentation, the idea of a recipe. And so we're making a certain recipe. We've got to hit a certain specification for the product that we deliver. And when it was with LEU for commercial fuel, it was a very consistent, stringent reactor spec. When we started moving to the liquid waste approach, it got a lot more complex with regard to hitting a specification. What I mean by that is that box on the right represents that big system that Mr. Borders shared with y'all earlier today. That system, in those tanks are various quantities of different material that change. The recipe on the very back end stays the same, but what they gather out of the tanks changes. So we have to adjust our recipe to accommodate for the changes that are inside the waste tanks. So in doing that, the daunting logistical and planning tasks just increased, and that's what our team works on. So we have a process called the waste acceptance criteria, where all of the waste that we send out of the canyon has to meet a certain criteria, and we develop a plan in which we show compliance with that criteria. Once you can meet that criteria, you have to wait for the batch timing. So we can only discard in certain batches, and we wait for a window of opportunity to make that discard. And all that together makes a very complicated planning problem that has to be approached with very sophisticated tools, and that's what I'll show you. So keeping in mind the idea of a recipe. So one of the ways in which we adjust that recipe is in the fuels that we select. So I brought this because as you look in El Basin, you see a vast sea of these fuel bundles. So they all look the same, and you'd say, just go pick 10 of these out of the pool and start processing them. Well, if you did that, then you might shortcut what you're going to do in 3 years from now. You may grab more of one type of fuel element that you may need later on to bud up and make sure that you've got a better composition later on down the life cycle. So the point bringing this was I like props, 1, and 2, this is just a can. So when you hear about a bundle, it's no more than an empty can, and inside the can are these fuel elements here, and they're vastly different. whether it be low enriched uranium, high enriched uranium. And so we have to be very smart in which bundles we go after, not just today, but 10 years down the road. And the bundle we select today could affect what bundle you pick 10 years down the road. So that's what our team does, is look ahead and say, how do we smartly pick the compositions of bundles to maximize the amount of throughput and not have wasted cost in the future? Because if you go randomly pick them, you're probably going to have added cost in the future. So going back to the idea of a recipe. So I thought it was kind of cool to come present here. I grew up down here. I'm from the Low Country, and so I thought about an analogy I could use with the canyon process, since it did become a lot more simple. And so I'll talk to you about an idea of just making sweet tea. So our process has gotten simple enough to where all we're doing is dissolving the fuel. And when I say dissolving the fuel, if you think of this as just a sugar stick going into sweet tea, making a recipe, that's very high level, the non-chemist view, very high level of how we go and make the nuclear solutions. We're using nitric acid and dissolving spent nuclear fuel. And all we're doing is dissolving it, putting it in a liquid form, prepping it, storing it, prepping it, and then discarding it to the waste tank farm. So the takeaway from this slide is, while these fuel bundles all look the same, you got vastly different compositions. We've even have some different fuel types. I call those sugar cubes and sugar sticks. And so going on the sweet tea analogy, if you think about, you're making tea, how strong can that tea be? How strong can that uranium stream be? We have to not only control how much we send down to the tank farm, but how strong that tea is. And there's safety limits around the strength of that uranium stream. The interesting thing about uranium and all fissile isotope or fissile material is that not all of the uranium is the same. We have to deal with isotopics. So what I mean by that would be, just like with sugar, you have cane sugar, you have high fructose sugar. Uranium, same way. You have different types of uranium. They react differently at a molecular level, and we have to control the amount of uranium-235 that we send down. So we've got the amount of tea, how strong the tea is, the type of sugar we're putting in the tea, the type of uranium. We're making a mixture, we're making a recipe, and now we want to maximize that strength. We want to maximize the amount of loading that we put into that solution. So then we add what we call poison. And so just like you would sweeten the tea really high, add a little bit of lemon in there to tone down the sweetness, we do that with what we call poison. So add poison in to reduce the reactivity of the 235, allow us to maximize the amount of strength of that tea or fuel mixture before we send it down. We always have to look at the history, the what type of fuel, the age of the fuel, where did it come from. All of these items play into the complex chemistry recipe that we have to make before we can send the solution down to the tank farm. So bottom line, that complex chemistry requirements, they must be balanced, now and then years from now. And that's one of the big takeaways. It's not just this year, it's the preceding years that we have to ensure that we're not taking more of one type of thing to shortcut the recipe in the future. And the success in making the right recipe is definitely in the details. So this is a very simplistic discussion about how we dissolve and discard fuel, but there are a lot of fine details that make this very complex. So one of the tools we use in order to get the right chemistry, we have a model, and I don't really want to get into all of the details of this model, but the idea here is that on each one of these columns, we have a different type of fuel, whether it be HYFER, MTR, non-aluminum, fast critical assembly, the Japanese material, and we adjust these per year, and on the fly, we can look and see how we're balancing all of the different variables now and in the years ahead. So as we move, say we want to do more dissolutions one year and get rid of some material, how will that affect the processing days that we're going to require the canyon to operate? How will it affect the amount of volume now that we have to store in the canyon? So Because we dissolve fuel, we build up volume in the canyon, and we can only store so much. So we don't want to fill up too fast. So all of this together helps to paint a picture of what fuel you have to go after, when do you need to go after it, how fast do you need to run, what do you need to add to it, are there opportunities to cut costs? I mentioned the poison. One of the things we don't like to do is add poison. We like to minimize the amount of poison that we add. So this poison isn't free, so we like to minimize it for cost savings so we can watch real time as we adjust these dissolutions to see how it affects the poison. So once you get all that chemistry right, how do you get it to liquid waste? So that's where the timing piece comes in. And I mentioned the timing piece because, one, it tells you how fast you need to run the canyon, but also if you're delayed by some period of time, that could upend your entire chemistry analysis to where you run it again. So the timing actually affects the chemistry, actually affects the timing, and it's an iterative process. So we look at all of the requirements we have for safety and all of the regulatory requirements, the input chemistry that we have coming out of the basin, the timing for all of this, and it all interacts to make one large system. So we talked a little bit, this has been mentioned, the idea of a sludge batch. A sludge batch merely is the opportunity we have to discard our material down to the liquid waste, and then they gather material out of the tanks and make one combined sludge batch, one combined recipe. We contribute a part of that sludge batch. We're easier to adjust the knob, so we'll adjust our chemistry and our flow rate, our throughput, to ensure that the resultant recipe in the tank farm meets the criteria. So once you get the chemistry right, you got the timing, now you get into the throughput and how fast does the canyon run. One way we do this is everything is so complex and so iterative that we need some sophisticated tools. So we've got this tool called discrete event modeling. So if you go back to the sweet tea analogy or just a restaurant analogy, if say, just take for example, sugar is very scarce and the suppliers want you to go forecast out 5 years what your sugar demand is going to be in order to sustain your restaurant and to keep running. How would you do that? Well, you could do some averages. You could look at just on a yearly basis, and you could do a really rough estimate of how much you should order. But they want it by month. They want it and it could cost millions of dollars of lost sales if you get a month wrong here or there. So how would you do that? Well, you can, like I said, you could look at it what we call the top down, which is looking at rough averages, or you could build it step by step and take every step it takes in order to make a compliant glass of tea and deliver that tea to the customer. So you start at the customer's coming in the door. What season is it? Are their tastes going to change over time? How much of each type do they typically request? And you run a scenario where you do it every step of the way, all the way to you deliver it. Then you run those steps for all year, and then you have items within each one of those steps that could affect how well those steps are performed. So staffing. Do you have folks that are calling in sick? How many folks do you have available when you are making this? And do you have enough wait staff? How many failures do you expect to have? Is some of your critical equipment going to go down? And then what's your efficiency? Are you going to build up your efficiency over time? And you roll the dice and based on some assumptions that you've seen from the past of how well you run, and you do it over and over and over again, and you build out an entire year, and then you could see what is your end result at the end. And you have this model built, and you can say, okay, I expect to have this much resulting product in the end based on these sets of assumptions, and here's my range in which I expect that I'll fall in. And so you're able to predict events years out in the future by doing this discrete event model, building it step by step by step versus just doing an overall average, and there's a lot more uncertainty in doing it that way. So when you do it step by step by step, run it many times over and over, you get a lot more accurate number, and then you can also run scenarios and be a lot more nimble in your evaluation. So this just shows you run 1 year, and then you run 2 through 10, and each time you run it, you get an end result, and then you can run these scenarios thousands and thousands of times over to build a level of confidence in where you think those results are going to end up. So the main takeaway is, yes, this is a sophisticated model. It builds it from the ground up, and it looks at every single step, and it assumes some failures, but it's very important to plan ahead. What you decide to run today will impact what you will have to run in the future, and if you're not looking at year 10 and year 1, you may be making a costly mistake. So that's what this tool helps us do. It basically helps us save money and plan to be efficient. So this is an output from that tool, that discrete event tool that shows it step by step building up. And this is just an example of the volume chart in the canyon. And like I mentioned earlier, we can only store so much solution. That's the top where we can store. This line here, it represents that computer running that simulation over and over and building up a curve that shows very refined predictions on where you'll be in 2028, 2032, and you could say, oh, do I have any pinch points here? What if I have a failure of a specific type of equipment? Does that line jolt up and give me a problem here? What if I increase my operators by 3, or do I have some other additional knobs I can turn? How does that impact this curve? And that's what doing that type of approach from the bottom up allows you to do. So, what does all this modeling mean? Well, first off, I'd say the recommendation that the CAB had, I believe it's 387. The recommendation that the CAB had to monitor the criteria between SRMC and SRNS and establish those criteria and begin to monitor them. This kind of parlays well into that recommendation. This really is just a primer for how complex that process is. It's a constant, continual management of that system to ensure those criteria stay aligned. And the team of engineers that we have working on this, SRMC has equivalent caliber folks. Our counterparts over there are looking at this on the other side to making sure that they're giving us the right inputs and we stay aligned. So once we get all this modeling done, the model predictions help us set goals with DOE and say, hey, next year we are going to need about this many dissolutions in order to stay in alignment for the life cycle and run. And then we start monitoring performance against that. Other things it gives us is what operational risks should we be concerned about? How long and how could affect the mission success? Should we put more capital investment in infrastructure on a certain item to increase its reliability to then reduce the risk and get that curve more tight for your range at the end? What regulatory limitations are challenging the mission? So Jeff Bentley's going to talk to you here in a little bit about one of those. So we can go and say, if we could just tweak this number here, our throughput goes high here, or hey, it really doesn't matter if we move that number. He's going to talk to you about fissile loading in glass, which we can show does impact the life cycle. The poison requirements, I mentioned that. Can we reduce the amount of poison that we add to strengthen that nuclear solution going out to the tank farm? And like I mentioned, capital investments to reduce risk or accelerate the mission. More storage tanks to give you more buffer, more lag storage, faster processes. Bottom line is, in the complex ABD system, modeling is critical to avoid the unnecessary costs. And so we've talked through how modeling helps you predict the chemistry and get the chemistry balance right, how modeling helps you look at the operations from the ground up and see how much your throughput will be. We've talked about how it helps you set goals and establish what you're going to run near term, and then it also helps us look at the performance and while we're executing the mission. So we have tools that allow us to look at the performance, and so for the example, this timeline here shows where we're planning to do dissolutions and discards across the year, fiscal year going into next year, and this constantly evolves based on how well and how successful we are. And then we have model predictions for the volume. Again, that's a real critical feature for us, a critical parameter. You can't get above the limit, so we monitor the volume projections, and it's kind of interesting. We're right in this area here on a downward slope. We're making discards in that right now. We're in a campaign of discards, so it's fun to watch it go down relative to your predictions and how you manage it. So after using all the planning tools and discrete event modeling to plan the mission, lock in near-term operational goals, modeling can also assist in helping inform management, helping inform DOE. How successful are we being today, and where do we expect to be, as late as tomorrow? So, with that, I'll take any questions.
Sade, we'll start with you. Your card was up first.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious about how was that tool developed and tested for validity and reliability?
So which tool is this?
The discrete modeling.
The discrete event? Yeah, so we do have a set of quality software quality assurance criteria to where we lay out what those critical requirements will be for the model to perform. And then we have tests that we run through, do some stress tests and things like that to ensure that that model is reliable. We also have the first output that I had shown you earlier. Oh, this one here. We use this for chemistry, but we also use it for a rough top-down estimate of the operational performance. That gives us another way to basically do a validation. So it's more of this is more like the Excel hand calc of doing the prediction, where the DBD does, or the discrete event model will build it one by one. So we have a way to validate it. We have some software documentation that formalizes that process, and we constantly bounce it back and forth. Does this make sense to ensure that prediction is, we ask ourselves that question every day. How reliable is that number?
Thank you. I'm curious about what is the variance between the predicted and the actual outcomes?
So we are just getting started in ABD. We know ABD was authorized last year, so we're just now getting into our discard campaign. We started March. So far, we've been pretty much on track. Now, it's hard to know much more past that because we haven't had that much actual runtime. The validation tool and the discrete event model, the differences between those, we're actually undergoing that process right now as part of our system plan development. So we owe the customer a system plan this year, and we're doing that level of back and forth validation right now as we speak.
Thank you.
Okay. John.
John Thomas, CAB. My first question, thank you for the presentation. My first question is around the bundles.
Yes.
And what's the safety surrounding that? Is this in a glove box, or how do you ensure the safety?
The bundles themselves are loaded underwater in the basin, Nell Basin. This is a mini bundle. They're actually more like 12, 14 feet tall. This is just a short one, so we could carry it around. And while it's a very simple can, there is a lot of analysis around it. It's an engineered product. It's got analysis for drop events, for items falling on top, from a safety standpoint, for very low risk type events, but to make sure that if it ever did happen, that it was safe. And so there's a lot of analysis around that can, even though it is just a tube.
Okay, thanks. And I was also wondering, as far as how do you make those selections? You said if you don't select the right one, it could cost more in the future. So how do I know I'm selecting the right one?
Yeah, so that's, again, we've got a team of chemical engineers looking at that constantly. They develop a charge plan, what they call a charge plan. That charge plan goes through a series of reviews. They get independent reviews by engineering staff to make sure that the resulting what the isotopics, what you expect that dissolver solution is going to look like, meets what we've modeled that we need in the back end. So it really works. We get the input from the tank farm on what we could send down. We run that through our models. We say, hey, really, this is the kind of characteristics we need for this batch of dissolver solution. And then our engineering department goes and looks through the documentation for each one of those bundle and assemblies, going back to what they call Appendix A's, which are it's an information packet that originated basically when we got the material from whatever source reactor we got it from. And so they'll correct for how long it's been sitting in storage, for how much things have decayed and all that, and then they'll get a prediction, and then that's what we go after.
Okay, thanks. And is it just an expense if we pick the wrong one? Are we looking for concentration in that?
If you pick the wrong one, it's an efficiency issue. You know, you've got some potentially some wasted opportunity in the future to maximize how much you get down in a certain sludge batch or batch. Now, I'll tell you, it's a pretty robust system. There's a lot of fuel that's of similar type, so we have a lot of flexibility. It's not to where, oh, I picked this one, I should have picked that. It's really, we need to be smart about what groups we go after, when we go after. So.
Okay, thanks. And my last question is, using your analogy on the iced tea,
Yes.
who is your customer? Who am I delivering that to the table to?
Okay, so for us in H Canyon, if I draw the box around H Canyon, it's SRMC, it's liquid waste. Ultimately, we're governed by the glass quality. So when they're eventually vitrifying the sludge in DWPF, that backs all the way up to tell us what we need to send per sludge batch. And so we adjust our recipe, but our customer really is SRMC.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Jim?
Jim Gill, CAB. In the flow charts that you were using, you made reference to something called a transfer window.
Yes.
Could you explain that to me, and how do you calculate one?
Yeah, so if I draw the box around the canyon, which we're a lot more integrated than that, so but if I just merely say, okay, my boundary zone, I'm in the canyon, it's when the tank farm tells me I can transfer that solution down. What it really means is that entire system that Mike Borders showed you with all of those integrated facilities, there are opportunities where the tank in which we transfer to is open, and we have an opportunity to transfer. So those are the opportunities we look for, and that's what we call a window. And so when certain transfers are ongoing in the tank farm, and that tank's not affected, and there's an open transfer path, we take advantage of that to not disrupt the overall liquid waste system and meet the needs of the canyon for transferring down.
Okay, so basically you're finding opportunities in the schedule where you can move something ahead a little bit.
That's correct. And those opportunities go into the model as inputs. And if we have pinch points and things we know are going, that's where we have a lot of discussion with tank farm. Yep.
All right, and the last question, do you have to deal with thorium as well as uranium and plutonium?
So we have done some thorium work in the past. We discarded some sodium reactor experiment fuel several years ago. That was non-ABD scope. We have a set of thorium-based fuel rods in our non-aluminum clad subgroup of fuels. So we've got flow sheet work that's got to be done for all that, and a lot of development work there. And that's in the out years. That's probably post 28, 30 timeframe.
Okay, thank you.
Charles?
This was interesting.
Okay.
As you receive waste, we're talking about the German waste now,
Okay.
coming in. Do you actually sample these fuel cells to determine what's in it? I mean,
Yeah.
it comes from a type of reactor, so you assume that's what you're dealing with, or do you actually somehow do a determination of what you're dealing with?
Yeah, so when we receive it, it just to clarify, it's not waste, it's spent fuel. The German fuel or any other fuel, any other spent fuel would come along with what I mentioned earlier, the Appendix A's, and that basically, we require a certain set of information before we receive that fuel on site so that we know we can process it. So there's evaluation done to make sure we can process that fuel, and we have all those key attributes. And as that fuel sits in the basin and decays and cools off, those isotopes change over time, so our engineers will calculate what the new range of those isotopes are. And that information is accurate. We do not sample the fuel. That would be costly. That would have a lot of dose. It has to be done in hot cells, transportation, and there's no need, really. We have all the information we need in order to make that batch. And once we dissolve that batch, for accountability, we'll take samples and ensure what we expected to have in there is what we got.
I'm just curious, those Appendix A's or whatever comes with have you found some of them to be less than stellar in their analysis?
Not that I can recall. I do not remember a time where we had a large discrepancy in my recollection.
It's interesting.
Any other questions or comments from around the table? Seeing none. James, thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right. Give us just a moment.
He's my counter. He's going to be my stand-in counter.
Okay. Right.
But I'm going to be giving a presentation. He's here though for questions and to represent Liquid Waste.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then forwards, backwards laser. At your leisure, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Bentley. I work over in the Nuclear Materials Organization at the Savannah River site. I have the H Canyon and the H area programs that are associated with it. I came to talk to you guys last fall down in Savannah, talk to you about ABD and the new mission that we were taking on. And I've got with me here a counterpart from the Liquid Waste Organization, Mr. John Clark. I apologize, the counterpart I was with, working hand in hand with, he found some grass that was a little greener somewhere else. I think it was out in Kansas or Nebraska or somewhere. So he left a couple weeks ago. But John's familiar enough with this area that he could step in. So following that ABD presentation last fall, you guys put together a recommendation to the department. We got it in January of this year. And basically, it was a recommendation. It had three parts to it. One was recommended that we work together, that we integrate with each other, both the nuclear materials and liquid waste, to assure that both of our missions would be successful, and to identify whatever criteria we would have to tackle to ensure that success. You also suggested that we come periodically give you a brief on said criteria, and then also to come and give you briefs periodically on the status of the missions. So I apologize. The response has worked its way through the House. I can tell you that the DOE's response was to accept the three subparts. You guys should be seeing that response before your June committee meetings, okay? So it's coming along its way, but the fact of the matter is today, this is the first update under that response. So we're going to talk a little bit about fissile mass loading in glass waste canisters. So I'm going to piggyback on James a little bit and tell you what I want to do is I want to make James's sweet tea a little bit sweeter. Okay? When we talk about fissile material, what we're talking about are specific isotopes that are capable of sustaining a chain reaction. We're not in a reactor, but in a reactor you would get a critical mass together and you'd have a reaction which you then would control and so forth. So we don't have that sort of thing, right? We're not controlling any reaction. So what we do is, with the fissile masses, we want to ensure that we can never get a critical mass together that could create a reaction and go forward. So the four main isotopes that the tank farm here is looking at, worried about, are the U-233, 235, and then the PU-239 and 241. So really over in H Canyon, the fuel we dissolve, it's the fissile material of interest is basically the U-235 and the plutonium 239. Currently, we're limited for the total amount of mass of those isotopes to just 2,500 grams for every cubic meter that goes into a glass waste canister. So we have to figure out just how much volume that is, how much mass in total that is that we can send to the tank farm into a sludge batch by working backwards. So at 2,500, the liquid waste partners here, they've already analyzed that in their system plan. It tells you all sorts of things like how many canisters they'll have to make and what types of safety precautions they have to put into place based upon that current loading limit. Some more things when we look at liquid waste and what they care about when we send them fissile material. They're worried about their glass durability. When they say, we want to know if it makes good glass, that's what they're talking about. Well, structurally speaking, is this glass going to be in the right form and be in the stable form and not basically crumble, fall apart, right? They also have to look at the criticality limits within the glass themselves. Once again, we don't want a situation where you could accumulate too much fissile material into any one space. And then over at DWPF, the Defense Waste Processing Facility, it has its own criticality limits, and so they have to go look at that as well to make sure no place in the process over there do they have an issue. From the nuclear materials side of the house, it's a little bit different what we're concerned with over in H Canyon. Really for us, it's about processing and how much material can we, how much spent fuel can we process through H Canyon and how much of that material can we discard over to the sludge batches and get put into those glass waste canisters. And as far as under the ABD mission, the higher the limit we would have, the less the number of glass canisters DWPF would have to make. Basically, the higher the limit, the more material we can send into each batch. And they're still going to make the same number of canisters, it's just it's got more of the stuff in it. We have here, maybe, do I need to point it that way? Or is it delayed? There we go. Okay. So we have a table up here. This is our projected total amount of fissile mass that's going to be going into each sludge batch. And then along with that total amount of, the total is in kilograms, but then along with that is what the concentration would be in grams per cubic meter. You can see that for the current sludge batch that they're compiling, 11, and then 12 and 13, there's no issue. We're well below the 2,500 concentration limit. But projections for sludge batch 14 and beyond, in order for us to be successful in getting rid of all the spent nuclear fuel, or obviously, as we've said, as much as we can out of L basin, we have some numbers that are a little bit higher than the 2,500, and then in the case at the back end, you had some much higher. So it doesn't prevent us from sending material to sludge batches, okay? we could stay as a status quo. It just means if we did that, it would limit us and it would reduce the amount of material that we could dissolve and get rid of. So what we want to do is we want to increase that limit if we can, if it's safe to do so. All right, so a path forward. Right now, the Savannah River National Lab, in conjunction with Savannah River, what's your mission completion contractor, they're getting their data together for what goes into the batches and looking at glass durability and glass quality, and then also the projections for the future. They're getting all that information together. And what we'll do is we'll put that data into a package. We'll send that information over. We'll go through the Office of Nuclear Energy, and they'll send that information over to the Sandia National Laboratory. The reason that's important is because Sandia National Laboratory, they're the ones who look at what's going to go into a future, I'll call it a generic repository, and make sure that everything is safe in that future repository. So they will want to see all of this information, all this data, and do their own analysis and say, yes, you guys are okay. As long as you're making good quality glass, we have no criticality issues, we have no other type of safety issues at a federal repository for a concentration at X or at Y, right? So we'll get a bounding limit as far as just how high up we could go. What we're doing is getting the information together to at least support what you saw back on the previous slide, the highest sludge batch limit. So we'll put together that information. So I think it was around 3600. We'll want a little bit of a buffer, because the thing about these projections are that they can change. You shouldn't see a drastic change, but they can change. They can vary up and down. We can get into that later as to why that occurs. But so we'll want a little bit of buffer. So maybe it's 4,500, maybe it's 5,000, right? But we're going to get together a limit, and we're going to put the data package together, send it to Sandia to do their own review. At the same time, we're going to put together, path forward is to put together a request. It goes up the chain to the highest person in the Office of Environmental Management. Today, at that time, that would be Mr. Ike White, but it will be a request to him to approve the increased fissile limit. As soon as he gets that request, the first thing he does is he goes to all of the other offices within the Department of Energy and gets their concurrence. So that's why it's important that we get a data package together and start working with the Office of Nuclear Energy and Sandia, because they're the ones that are really going to want to weigh in on this on approval. The last note you see down here, I guess I should say that it'll take us the whole process. If you're looking for a timeline, we expect to have a letter drafted and a request by mid or to late summer. I'm thinking the July, August timeframe. We'll have all the data as well at the same time to submit. I believe that we'll probably have a response early next year. So that's kind of sort of the time frame we're looking at. The last bullet here, I just want to point out. So the one thing we want to do while we're looking at our needs as far as sludge batches go is how much fissile content. We also want to keep in mind, as I said, we want a little bit of buffer for whatever number we choose. But we also want it to be such that it's not the federal repository that is limiting us, okay, as far as the total amount that we can, or as far as the limit goes, but rather the processes at the Savannah River itself. So let me just throw something out there for you. There's been some indications that as high as up to 7,800, they've got enough data already to kind of get a good feeling that we would be fine. Well, that's great, 7,800's, way up here, but we know we'll never even come close to touching that limit here at Savannah River, because within the liquid waste process, I've got limits in the tank farm, I got limits in DWPF that are much, much lower. I know in the tank farm there's things over in the evaporators, it's in the 4,000s. So I could never go above that anyway, right? The process will limit me and keep me and protect whatever the number is for the repository. Current status, we did kick things off towards the end of last year. And we actually at the time did start communications with all the parties, the stakeholders involved in the review process. We wanted to give them the heads up, get a feel, make sure everybody was on board and understood, come to agreement whether we thought this would be achievable or not. And we did. We've got some history, some previous analysis that's been done in the liquid waste system. And it goes back a ways on some of it, but some has been done. You look that they looked at increasing the loading for some other projects that did not happen, but up to 5,400, and they were fine as far as making good quality glass. So it just would become a matter of, at that level, is the repository, a generic repository, supportive of that? And in 2008, they also had some other analysis. Now, it doesn't mean we would not be performing any analysis on this one. Of course, we have to, but we just have some previous stuff that kind of supports what we're trying to achieve. And then there's been some public support, believe it or not. You have to go back a ways. 2010, the CAB themselves had issued a recommendation to the department about seeking 2,500 or higher for the fissile mass load limit. All right, some of the potential stakeholder concerns, as I call them, I thought I'd address right up front right here. The glass waste storage building, there's always seems to be some questions about will you need another building, to store the canisters? Will it impact the double stacking that you guys do over there? The answer to that on both is no, it doesn't. We would not need, obviously, we're reducing canisters by increasing the limit. And two, no, it will not affect the double stacking even with the higher fissile content. There's several parameters involved when you look at the canisters inside the glass waste storage building, but one of the ones, one in particular, when you think about worker safety and being able to go inside and how much heat's being generated from the canister, how much shine are they getting? Believe it or not, by increasing the fissile content in the canister, we actually lower the heat generated off the canister. And the reason is, it seems counterintuitive, I know, but that's the first thing I thought. Explain it to me. Well, the main driver on the heat being generated off the canisters is the cesium and the amount of cesium that's in there. So anytime we go and add more fissile material to a canister, in order to accommodate that in the canister, we have to reduce the cesium that's in it to make enough room. So since the cesium is so much more highly concentrated and giving off way more heat, the net effect is that the overall heat generation goes down. So just keep that in mind. And then on the nuclear safety side, I rest assured every single facility that could be affected by this, by an increased fissile limit, will be analyzed, for criticality concerns and any other safety controls. And on the liquid waste side, I have somebody here, but he'll tell you too, basically every facility over there, they're so integrated that they'll have to go look at every single facility and analyze it and make sure everything's good. More some than others, obviously, tank farms and and the Defense Waste Processing Facility, who are the main players in this. But it actually goes downstream. Salt waste and salt zone would have to be analyzed. And with that, if you have any questions.
Hi, thank you, Jeffrey. I'm curious about, like, on page 5 or slide 5, like, what is the timeline for your anticipated cell mass loading? Like, when does that happen?
So to increase it,
Yes.
so I think that by early next, I'm going to say it's the second quarter of the fiscal year, so somewhere in the January to March through March timeframe, I think we'll have a response on that we can have the approval by then.
Yeah. I'm also curious about, like, what are the differences between the sludge batch, like, for example, sludge batch 17 and 19 versus sludge batch 14 and 15. See, like, sludge batch 17 is only like 18 more kilograms than sludge batch 14. Yeah, it takes up more cell mass. So, like, what are the reasons for those differences?
I cannot answer all those questions. What I will tell you is this, and why don't you step in here, John?
Okay.
I'm not going to throw you under a bus, though.
Yeah.
So we know what we're contributing. On the nuclear material side, we know what we're contributing to a sludge batch. We send that information over to the liquid waste system, and then based upon what they are taking from their own material to compile a sludge batch and moving from tank to tank, well, that's going to determine the total amount that they have and the total amount concentration. And the thing about them is they don't always know what they have in a tank until it's been characterized. So there's a lot more unknowns in the liquid waste, some uncertainties, if you will, in the liquid waste system. And so these are projections based upon, we think we're going to take from tank X over here for sludge batch 12 and tank Y and as well, and based upon what they projected that they have in those tanks is leading to the numbers up here. Then a future sludge batch, something where they're looking to attack later on, down at sludge batch 18 might be coming from tank Z over there, and tank, we'll just call it Q over here. So different materials coming in at different times, uncertainties. That's why you see this variation. And basically what they do is they generate this forecast off of what we've sent them. So if you want to get more detailed and in depth, I would have to have somebody from the liquid waste system who does this type of the planning aspect come give you that.
But
Thank you.
also keep in mind that different materials have different densities. So as you're messing around with changing out the materials and their densities, that will change the fissile loading grams versus the kilograms just by themselves.
Thank you.
Okay. Ruth?
Ruth Hollingsworth, CAB. Mr. Bentley and Mr. Clark, thank you so much for your presentations. Every time that you have presented to us, it's been very informative, and I just want to thank you for that. I'm always amazed and feel very small in all of your intellect and all of the hard work of everyone at Savannah River. So I just want to say that. You may have touched on this, I'm not quite sure because I don't understand about the glass. And this was on page 4 or slide 4. And my question is, the glass durability limits and the glass criticality limits. The material that you place into the glass, it is mixed in with the glass, is that correct? Is it mixed in?
I'll let them talk.
Yeah, so the glass is frit, and so the glass serves as an encapsulant of it binds up with the fissile material. And so when we're looking at good glass versus not good glass, what we want is a glass that is durable, so it's non-leachable, it doesn't allow any, it actually binds the fissile material together. If if we move past the formulation, we could end up with a glass that's more friable, that will have the opportunity to release fissile material. So, but you want this glass to be stable, durable, and remain vitrified throughout the lifespan that it needs to hold on to that fissile material.
Thank you for that.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
what, do you have to change the formula of the glass for the different materials that you mix in, or do you just have one recipe for the certain types of materials that combined with?
So that one I would probably have to get back with you. If Jim Folk was here, he would know. My understanding is typically no, we order the glass pretty much in bulk. But I believe this we get upon different, like sludge batches, there may be a slight tweak in the formulation as we anticipate the batch. But the frit, the pre-made glass, comes in on, basic freight train, freight truck, a big freight container. So it's done every so often, but there may be tweaks, but the essential formulation of the glass remains the same.
And just lastly, is there an age limit for the glass? Does it degrade over time? Does it, I know it has great durability. I understand it is a very unique and positive way to handle these materials.
So now you're going to, again, I'm going to qualify this, but when I came on board, what I believe is they were looking for a glass with durability for 10,000 years. Does anyone else have, is there anyone I can call a friend on it? Mr. Putney?
I'll take 10,000 years.
Okay.
I'll take that, that'll be fine.
I believe that was the target, and, it has to stay stable throughout the longest half-life, that would get down to the, where it would basically be non-hazardous. So that's what I believe I read, but I will have to come back with you and verify that number.
Okay, and is there any other facility using this same process to store the materials in glass? Is there any place else other than Savannah River that is using this?
Using vitrification?
Yes, using vitrification.
So Hanford just bought on a big vitrification plant.
I don't think it started.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hanford's
they
getting ready to
announced-
start theirs up. They haven't quite
Yeah.
started up. It was done previously in New York and West Valley, but that has been dismantled since then, so.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
Jim?
Jim Gilcap. I'm back on a thorium kick here. Am I correct that thorium decays into uranium-233 and is fissile at that point?
Going to phone a friend as well on this one to see if I got somebody that,
So
I do not know thorium.
that's not, let's assume it is for the moment. How would you account for that in the calculations to determine your?
For the criticality,
Yeah.
what they do is they look at it, they call it a uranium-235 equivalent number. So they look at all the things that, and it's under what you call it as a 235 or an equivalent. So that's how they would have accounted for it. If there's something that can decay to it or whatever, that's where it's accounted at.
Okay, and if I'm right about the decay, thorium would be considered part of that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're right about the decay, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And we'll come around to Charles.
Charles Hilton Cab. Jeff, when this goes way back, and when they came up with the 2,500 grams per cubic meter or whatever it is, there was a huge safety factor on that, I'm sure. It takes 25,000 or 250,000 grams to go critical. Do you have any idea what the safety factor was as we talk about going up on that number?
I do not know what
Okay.
it was, but it obviously, even, so if you're looking at so many times of a safety, like you're talking 50 times, 100 times, or whatever, going from a 2,500 to a 5,000 or 6,000 is.
It's negligible, I hope.
So,
All right. You're on sludge batch 11 now?
they're compiling 11. So basically the way that works is once they have a sludge batch compiled and ready, qualified, they move it over to another tank and it feeds the waste processing facility, and then they start compiling a new one. So right now their sludge batch 10 is what's being sent to DWPF, and sludge batch 11 is what they're putting together. It's what we've been discarding to currently.
When do you anticipate the batch 14 being generated?
I would have to defer to John and look at the system
Yep.
plan to see when
Yeah,
that's
and
coming
I would
out.
have to look at the table, and I just cannot remember. We are,
It's out there. a
yeah,
little
it
bit.
is out there. It takes about a little bit more than a year to get through a whole sludge batch. So
Year and
I
a
guess
half.
add the number of years before we
But
get there.
it's probably about 18 months to get through a sludge batch.
Okay.
And so if you're looking at, we're compiling 11, so it probably won't start, it'll be next year.
3 years out.
Late next year or something, probably, that we actually start feeding sludge batch 11 and start compiling 12. So yeah, you can start doing another. Now at some point there though, it's around fiscal year 26-ish, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, James, 6 or 7, that we looking to have a second sludge batch prep tank come online, which will help speed up the process. Now, it doesn't speed up DWPF for using up the sludge batches, but it speeds up kind of the availability of our access to discarding. And like, it gives us more opportunity because we'll have 2 different tanks that we could discard our material into, but it won't affect the feeding, if you will, to DWPF. So the actual need for that higher than 2,500 that I think you're kind of trying to point to, right?
That's where I'm going.
But we want it before then because we would like to, because if it's higher now, we can go ahead and increase the fissile amounts that are on the prior batches and take some of the weight off of those back end batches, right? Because now that you've loaded more up front, it's less that you have to do at the end.
I'm just awfully afraid, knowing the federal government as I do, expecting an answer within 12 months
It's not-
even.
and I understand that too. I will tell you that a few years ago, as we went through the whole ABD process, we were at a limit of 897 for that, and we knew we were going to have to increase it. At the time, with the knowledge that we had, our best knowledge we had, we thought it was that 2,500 would cover us, that it would be more than enough. And so we actually got it raised. It's been a few, 2 years, 2.5 years ago that we got the approval. It wasn't that bad of a process. And that's without us pre-planning and working and going and meeting with our counterparts ahead of time. I mean, this was, so I feel pretty good that we'll get it.
Thank you.
As long as the data comes out good, we'll get there.
Can I get you to stand up at the mic for me?
14 is early 27, and, sorry, is it? not on?
It should be on. He just needed a second to turn it up. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah, no, sludge batch 14 is early 27, and like Jeff said, the greater than 2,500, our planning, all of our planning analysis is looking at scenarios of taking advantage of, or looking at when would be the earliest we could take advantage of that, and that's what we're targeting. So if we got it today, we wouldn't be taking advantage because we're still discarding to 11. So we're looking at when would be the earliest we could take advantage, and that's what we're targeting.
Yeah. And if we get it, as I said, at that time, we should be able to actually take advantage here still in sludge batch 11. I think there's a little window before it closes, before they close that for us to discard, that we could get some in.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns from around the table? Jeff, John, thank y'all so much.
All right.
Yeah, that's good. All right, running down the list. Has anybody signed up for a public comment? Seeing none, shall we move on? We give the opportunity, right? Okay. We have a few votes that we need to take care of. Normally, if you've been here for a while, you'd be doing exactly what Charles was doing and looking up under his nameplate for a clicker. We recently got a new laptop, and we're trying to still make those work with the new laptop, so we don't have it available today. If y'all are okay with it, we can take a hand vote as we go around. And the only thing I ask is that when we do that, if you will, please keep your hand up until the end of the vote. That way we make sure that I've counted everyone as we go around. The first things that we need to take care of are the closing these recommendations. So it's 365, 375, and 373. You'd think I'd have put those in order. All of these were discussed at the most recent committee meetings. Jim, I think a couple of these are yours, right? Or out of nuclear materials?
Uh, 365 and 373 are mine.
Okay. Do you have any comments that you want to make before we move into?
Just a brief as to what they involve.
Sure.
Both of these recommendations dealt with the downblending of plutonium, in particular compliance with the legal agreement between the state of South Carolina, Department of Energy. Responses were received. Initially, there was some issues, and that was recommendation 365. Then we wrote recommendation 373, which the department basically agreed with, pointing out that the K-complex downblending operation is not just both NSA and EM. At this point, they're getting a little old. We've moved on.
Okay. Do we want to deal with these one at a time, or do y'all want to put them together as a joint? How do you want to join? So can I take that as a motion to close 365 and 373?
propose.
So we have a motion from Charles. Do we have a second? And a second. Okay. All those in favor of closing these two recommendations, please
Aye.
raise your hands. Unanimous around the room. Just for giggles, I will ask if anyone is opposed and any abstentions. Thank you. This next one, the other one was 375. I believe that came out of, you got it pulled up? Awesome, that makes it a lot easier for me. So this was the chemicals recommendation that came out of the Waste Management Committee. Narinder, do you have any comments about this one that you want to make?
No, I'm very happy about that recommendation accepted.
Okay. Narinder's happy. He's ready to close it as the author.
I'm
That's an
ready.
endorsement, right?
Should I make the motion?
I would love it if you did.
I recommend to close it.
All right. Do we have a second? Second from Charles. All those in favor, please raise
Aye.
your hands. And that is once more unanimous on the room. Please, you put your hands down. I'm just asked, just so we cover our bases. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, everyone. Up next, we have the EMS SAB Chair's recommendation. This is the recommendation that we discussed yesterday that was very close to one written by the CAB and passed earlier. Greg, do you want to make any comments about this?
No, nothing other than I'm still convinced this is very good, solid public policy, and I think it's a way to pursue this stuff. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any discussion before we move into voting? Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll propose to.
All right, Narinder makes a motion. Do we have a second? All right, all those in favor, please raise your
Aye.
hands. And that's 100% again. You put your hands down. Any opposed? And any abstentions? All right. Yay. That's a good one, right? Next, we have the draft recommendation on accelerating the disposition of legacy tree waste. Greg, you wrote this one.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. I mean, we talked about this yesterday. I don't really have anything else to add to it. The more quickly we can get rid of stuff, the better. That's all I'll say.
Short and to the point. I love it. Any comments or questions before we move into voting for this one? Any statements anybody feels the need to make?
The baby of one week is closed.
Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Yeah, I think let's.
All right, Narendra's made the motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Jim. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All right, thank you. Any opposed? And any abstentions? All right, it's a unanimous vote again. And then lastly, we have the operating procedures. Remember, these were the operating procedures. You've all had a chance to read them, take a look at it. We talked a little bit about the changes that were made yesterday. Are there any questions or comments about these before we vote on them? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve? Thank you, Steve. Do we have a second? All right, thank you. All those in favor? $16. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. That passes unanimously. Just so that you know, next steps, these actually go to headquarters first before they're enacted locally. We'll still be operating under our 2017 operating procedures. Headquarters takes a look. They make sure that a lawyer has a chance to review it and that it conforms with all the upper level guidance that governs the boards. And then once they sign off, that's when we'll adopt these and start using them. All right. Greg?
All righty. Thank you, everybody, for a good meeting. Thank you, all of our subject matter experts and others for being here with us. I'll see everybody at the, where are we? We're in May, June subcommittee meetings. Look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for a good meeting, and we are adjourned.
Okay. Done.
All right, thanks for standing in for us so we can run this thing.